right, good evening everyone. So it's been a long day for all of us, but I promise you made the right choice being here tonight at this panel. I think this is going to be a really juicy, interesting discussion. I think the topic has a lot more depth than you would think at first. Already in our email exchanges before this panel, it became quite heated, so I'm really looking forward to this. We're going to actually start with Professor Maximilian von Grafenstein, who I'm very glad is here today, not only because he has an impressive name, but also because he's a very smart guy. He's the professor for digital self-determination at the Einstein Center Digital Future in Berlin. And his research focus is actually on the regulation of data-driven innovation, with a focus on data protection and security by design. Max is the chair tonight and will bless us with an opening statement.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. This is a great honor, and I hope that I will fulfill the expectations or meet the expectations. So, so the subject matter of this panel is today: does certification of data anonymization make sense? And I really think that this is a very interesting topic or questions, and because actually we had, as you already said, during our first email exchange, in particular with Lorraine, me and Lorraine, almost a fight about whether this makes sense or not. So I think it makes sense because I think that certification mechanisms for anonymization processes can be very useful for the stakeholders involved. But, and this is, I have to confess, I'm not sure myself whether this is actually possible or so feasible or legally possible. And I would like to explain why I see these difficulties and then open the stage for our discussion. So why do you think that certification mechanisms for anonymization processes can be really useful? Well, I think this is the easier issue to explain because certification mechanisms are deemed pursuant to the GDPR to increase legal certainty. I mean, the law, the GDPR itself states that adherence to a certification mechanism can demonstrate compliance with the GDPR, is an element to demonstrate compliance with the GDPR. And what does this mean, compliance with the GDPR? Well, this means, amongst others, also compliance with the principle of data minimization, which means in turn, so the principle of data minimization, that a data controller has to de-identify as best as possible, the personal data, given a specific processing purpose. And so looking back into to the last 5 years, I think it is a rather tricky question to answer whether a controller has, in a specific context, sufficiently met this principle of data minimization, which means in the best case has completely anonymized personal data, or at least pseudonymized, or whether not. And let me go into a little bit more detail why this question is so difficult, at least from my legal perspective. So let's start with the question of anonymization. So as far as I understood, the rather technical debate indeed, is that there is no zero risk of de-anonymization, which means, as far as I heard, that there might be always a case where an attacker, so intentionally or maybe another third person accidentally, can re-identify, because of certain extra knowledge, a person is existent or inherent in, in an anonymized data set. So this is at least what I heard. And of course, the question is now not so on the technical side, but on the legal side, because we do not know what actually the legal expectations are, which risk of de-anonymization is legally acceptable, with the result that legal experts say, well, okay, if you anonymize the data like that, then we consider the data as really effectively anonymized, or whether the legal experts say, well, I think the risk of de-anonymization is still too high, with the result that the GDPR applies. And I guess, it's just a guess, I think that, for example, this is one use case where an increase of legal certainty can really help, which might happen through the use of certification schemes for anonymization processes. In that use case, of course, I mean, the entity which profits most from an increase of legal certainty is the anonymizing entity. There is, however, another use case where it's more the user of anonymized data which might profit from an increase of legal certainty. And this use case is a use case where I'm also very often involved in, for example, in explorative research processes. For example, a user of originally completely anonymized data might come in its explorative research process to the conclusion that the data is now too anonymous, so it has a too high level of aggregation, and it needs more granular data. So in that case, it would like to de-anonymize a little bit the data so that it can meet its research purposes, for example. And in that case, you come certainly to the conclusion, okay, now the data is not anymore anonymized. Now the GDPR applies. Now, nevertheless, the principle of data minimization applies, and it's a huge question now. So under which conditions does such a research team really fulfill the principle of data minimization and all the other legal requirements? And here again, I think that a certification mechanism which addresses this kind of legal certainty can really increase legal certainty and can really help. So far to why I think it might be useful to have certification mechanisms for anonymization processes, or at least data minimization processes. And now let's come to the point why I think, why I doubt that this might be feasible or legally possible. Because if you look at this process where you have changes during the data processing processes, then you need actually a certification mechanism which is dynamic. And with that, I mean that you cannot say, so normally if you have a certification program, you have the criteria specifying the broad legal terms of the GDPR, and there is a certain moment in time where the certification body goes to the controller and says, well, now I check your process against these criteria, and I can tell you in the end of my assessment whether you meet my criteria and so the GDPR or not. But if we look at the situation where in an explorative research process, or of the situation that, for example, an Etica might prove anonymization technology wrong, so that it doesn't work anymore, this means that there might be, after certification, that there might be a change, and a certification mechanism which tries to establish legal certainty must be able to react to that kind of change. And when I spoke in Germany with some data protection authorities, or also with the German accreditation agency, which must confirm a certification scheme, they saw the problem or the challenge of such a dynamic certification scheme, but nobody was sure whether this is actually feasible or even legally possible. So, and well, whether my two remarks, so the usability of certification schemes and the feasibility of these schemes is true, I would like to find out in this panel discussion.
Nice. We will certainly finally answer that question on this panel, I'm sure. So, but you made a really good actually handover here to Félicien. So Félicien is a privacy technologist at CNIL, and I'm sure everyone knows CNIL, and even more so after the $50 million fine, euros fine to Google. So well done. So these are actually the guys on the ground, right? And these are the guys who have to decide, well, is a system good enough or not? So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how that might change in the future?
Okay, thank you, Felix. thanks everybody for coming here tonight. So first of all, I wanted to show you, well, basically, as Felix said, on the ground, how we proceed with anonymization at the CNIL. So, and basically where we're heading to with this GDPR certification, should we decide to adopt it. So today, the idea is that we are just a small group of privacy technologists working for the CNIL, and it's very craftsmanship. We are analyzing processes of anonymization that people submit to us, and the idea is that we will see practically if they produce indeed anonymous data. And this is obviously, as you know, very critical step because an anonymization process is the fact to build a bridge between personal data and non-personal data, and meaning no GDPR, no data protection rules anymore. So we have to be, the idea is to be very strict and, well, very, have a lot of attention in this process. As I said, it's very artisanal way to do so, but we have a tool that's been issued by the Article 29 Working Party in 2014. That's called the Opinion on Anonymization Techniques. So basically, what's in this document, it gives 3 criteria that you can use and that we use to decide whether or not a data set is anonymous or not. So these 3 criteria are you able to single out an individual? Are you able to link 2 records together? And are you able to infer attributes from the data set? So that's one way to do this. And there's also another way to prove your data set is anonymous, is to do a risk rate identification risk analysis. That, to my knowledge, no one ever provided to us yet, because it's really complicated and no one really knows how to do it. But we'll discuss this later, I suppose. So that's the current state of things. And what we plan to do with certification is actually to have a tool that could enable really to scale up and to ensure homogeneity of the decision of what is anonymous data set. However, we are in the current stage of deciding how we're going to deal with this certification. It's going to be national or European certification. We are more toward national certification so far. And also who's going to deliver it. And it's going to be really not necessarily easy to do so because anonymous processes, they're very unique. Each anonymous process might be different from another one. And so you have to sometimes might be really difficult to scale up. So how are we going to do it? Who's going to do it? Is it going to be clean? Is it going to be third-party assessors? Or is it going to be both of them? Maybe some part of it being doing by CNIL and the rest, more easy ones by third parties, remains to be seen. But I'd be glad to hear what the next panelists have to say with this.
Well, it's certainly not going to be easy. So we'll hand over to Lorraine. I'm sorry, my French is horrible. Lorraine Maisnier-Boche. Lorraine actually has a really interesting background as well. She's an IT and data protection lawyer at McDermott, Vallet, Emery in Paris, but she used to be working at the French e-health agency Santé, is it called? Where she was actually, helping with the certification process. So in a way, you've seen both sides of the coin. This is really interesting, and I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say from your stories from the battlefield.
Okay, yeah. So I used to work in this agency, e-health agency, which is managing a certification for security of health data hosting service providers. So in France, when you wish to host health data, you have to be before the certification, you had to have a ministerial approval, and now you have to be certified by private certification bodies. And what is very interesting in this program and the work this agency is doing is that it advises the state and the health professionals on the information system in health law. It helps drafting regulations on e-health problematics, and it also manages labels and certification. Donc we really have the two roles. and it gave me the opportunity to work with private and public bodies, especially on anonymization question. For instance, if you have a public body who already has existing databases, such as the body has mandatory obligation to collect notification concerning drug safety, pharmacovigilance. A very interesting and very rich database can be drawn from this. If this body wishes or need, per legal obligation, to study this notification for national health monitoring purposes, for instance, how do they do it? We always have questions like that, and the big question for this is, do we anonymize and how? So, do we anonymize? We don't need, for a health monitoring purpose, we don't need the identity, we don't need to identify individuals, because it's at a national level, we are looking for signals. But will the data will still be useful after applying an anonymization technology? And if during the research, during the study of those notifications, if a correlation is made, about common causal elements, then we do need to contact the concerned person, because we have analyzed, we have detected a correlation. So we do need to reverse the anonymization technique, and we need to contact the individuals. And then, so do we anonymize or not? And then if anonymization is the right way to go, is there actually a technology good enough for our DPA, the French DPA, that we could use right now for immediate anonymization, secure, and that will stay that way as long as we can use this program? And then if we have such a stamp from the French DPA, then again the question remains, is the data will still remain useful? Because it is not, to my knowledge, a criteria which is in the Article 29 Working Party guidance today. So these are the questions we have all the time at the agency, and I will have to answer it as a lawyer tomorrow. So I'm really looking forward to discuss this with our DPA today.
Okay, cool. We'll move over to Ilya. Where's my page for Ilya? Wait a second. So Ilya is actually the data protection officer at Teralytics. For those of you who don't know Teralytics, they do monetization of aggregated and anonymized telecommunications data. He has a computer science and a privacy background with a master degree in distributed systems and natural language processing, and also very many privacy certifications that I'm not going to name. So obviously Ilya is in a situation where he often has to talk with customers around the globe who are trying to produce and use anonymous data, and that seems to be really difficult at the moment.
Hi everyone. First, thanks a lot for being with us at 5:30. Yeah, it means that you love anonymization as much as we do. Yeah, I would like to quickly introduce our business case, and then go into this two-step anonymization process which we do, and then also comment on the certification topic. Yeah, and then probably also drop in a couple of questions for the panel. So, what we partner with telecom companies, and the problems which we solve for our data customers is like where would you put a new shopping mall in order that more people can drive a less distance to this shopping mall? How to optimize the transportation network so that more people can commute with a bus and not with a car. So, like, there is a lot of value in this data, and we all want to live in like in a better city. We want to have shorter commuting times, but we also, everyone has a like cell phone, me also, yeah, and we want our privacy to be protected, and we kind of like need to find a balance here. And how do we do it currently? So we work in several European countries, in Asia, in Singapore and Hong Kong, now getting into more Asian countries, also in the United States. So we partner with a telecom company. So telecom company is in charge of collecting this data, obviously. Yeah? It's a signal of the phones, which phone produces on a regular basis. And then they anonymize this data, but it stays on the individual level. And then they hand it over to us in the sense that, so our servers are in the infrastructure of the telecom company. That means we are still in the same like security zone. And then Teralytics does the location estimation, so you need to interpolate a lot, you need to clean the noise. Then we do aggregation, extrapolation to the whole population count, and then we give this aggregated and anonymized counts to our data customers, like transportation, mobility companies. Yeah, so you can see that there are like 2 steps of anonymization. So one is done by telecom company, which is on the individual level. And the data is still, it stays on the individual level, yeah, because for the data customers, we need to aggregate it in many different ways, so the different types of analysis. We cannot do it in one shot. And then in the next step, we do this aggregation. And basically the biggest problem we have in all jurisdictions, I mean, because we want sustainable business, so that means we want to anonymize this data in the way that the risk is extremely low, and we will not run into problems also ourselves. So the biggest challenge is how to assess that the individual level telco data, which was anonymized by our telecom partner, is really anonymous or is it not? And in many countries, we are asked by telcos to also advise on this method. So we also collected, because we see like different jurisdictions, yeah, we also advise them how would we do that. Regarding the certification, one trend which we see like several years ago in Asia, basically the attitude was, we currently don't have protection laws, yeah, so we are like more flexible, you know what I mean? But now, because the GDPR came and it is being propagated to the Asian laws, basically an environment which is not regulated at all currently leads to a fear. So the big companies, they have a fear that afterwards there will be like penalties which will be imposed retrospectively and so on. Yeah. So instead of there are no laws and regulations, they are upcoming, there are some drafts and so on, but the companies are still, they are not willing to go even so far as the European countries in a regulated environment do. And that's why I mean, I completely agree with the point that such a certification is an extreme challenge, but on the other hand, not having any benchmark, also based on our experience in Europe, leads to the fact that there is a huge level of uncertainty, really huge. And DPOs of the telecom companies, for example, they also, I mean, they are responsible at the end, yeah? So having the uncertainty, they take the defensive approach, and it does not allow to utilize the data as much as we could do for the common purpose.
I think it's an important point to take away from this as well, as you came up with this anonymization yourself. I mean, not you yourself, but your company, right? This is the way you do it.
Yeah.
So every anonymization process that is on the market today is individual. It's tailored, not every, but many of them, right? They are tailored to very specific use cases. And for someone to say afterwards, this works or this doesn't work, I think that's a really big challenge, and we're probably going to go into this later. Let's finish up our introduction round with Paul. Also a professor, Paul Francis. He's the scientific director at the Max Planck Institute for Software Systems. And he's held a bunch of research positions at Cornell University, NDT Labs, Belcore. And he's been working on a new system for anonymization and even, well, at least as interesting, a scoring system for anonymization. So maybe you want to talk about that, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. So actually, first, nobody's introduced Felix, so...
Oh, that's, that's true. I'm Felix. Hi, everyone.
Let me do it myself. This is Felix Bauer. Felix is the CTO of the company Aircloak. Not CTO, CEO. Sorry, Felix. And Aircloak is trying to make, well, I think making, a very general purpose anonymization product. So sort of contrary to what Ilya was talking about, which is a specific anonymization approach for telecommunications mobility data, We're working on a product that basically can stick it in front of any database of raw data. It doesn't matter what the type of data is. And then you can make queries to that database through Aircloak's product, and the resulting answers will be anonymous. And I mean this in the GDPR sense. So yes, I'm a professor at the Max Planck Institute for Software Systems, but I'm also a co-founder of Aircloak. So Felix and I are very close in this regard. And so I guess I think I have three sort of messages to say. So you've already been introduced by Felix with these concepts of anonymity with respect to this Article 29 opinion on anonymity. So they're singling out linkability and inference. And my technology and Aircloak's technology is really working with these basic criteria as the foundation of anonymization for our system. The underlying technology of Aircloak's product is called diffix. So this is why the word diffix appears up here. And actually, I wanted to start. I was talking with Max before this, and he brought up a scenario that he suggested was often confused. People were often confused by with respect to what is and isn't anonymization. So I actually wanted to pass this scenario by the group here, the audience, and just to get a show of hands. So imagine this is a city. The city has all these CCTV cameras, right? So they're monitoring the movement of people, but they want to release this data to whatever, to researchers or something. And so they anonymize it by basically blacking out all the individuals in the camera. So instead of seeing a person, you just see, say, a black square. You don't see their clothes. You don't see anything about how big or small they might be. It's just a black square, and that you see black squares moving around. And so that's the level of anonymization. And then my question for the audience would be, is that anonymous or not, right? Would these black squares be considered anonymous in your mind? Kind of keeping a strong definition with respect to the GDPR, or would this not yet be anonymous? So how many people think that just providing black dots instead of anything else with these cameras would be regarded as anonymous?
Oh, wow.
Okay. What? Well, let's go the other way. Yeah, somebody has to do it. So the other way, how many would consider it as not anonymous? All right, we have a...
So that's a very well-informed audience, I would say.
Anybody who raised their hand want to shout out why it's not anonymous? Yeah, go ahead.
One place to another. So immediately you will have where they live, where they work, their whereabouts, and that gives you information. Time, you have all types of information, the car they are taking and so on. So a lot of metadata on that person can help to identify him again.
Yeah, okay. Right. So yeah, and in a sense, one of these criteria, the singling out criteria, would be violated. And that's why the criteria exists. If you can just look at a data set, even if you can't, without external knowledge, identify who that person is. If you can just say, this is one person, and that would be the case in the CCTV camera, right? This black dot is one person. As long as you can say only that, then by these criteria, this would not be anonymous. But I guess the audience knows that already.
So Paul, what if you have these different cameras and one black dot moves out of the field of one camera and doesn't immediately enter another one? So I cannot really tie them together. Is it anonymous then?
Yeah, as long as it's a black dot that represents one person, it's not anonymous by singling out. Okay, we won't get into that anymore. So I've really three things. We'll get back to it,
We'll
right?
get back to that, yeah, good.
Why?
So I have three things really that I want to say. First of all, a lot of people I talk to say, we just think it's impossible to have data that's both anonymous and reasonably usable for analytics. And I think we've had a lot of success with our technology in the last few years, and I think it's possible. So I'll just say that for now, and maybe we can explore it. But one of the challenges that we've had, as a company marketing this technology is how can anybody, ourselves or say our customers, be confident that indeed the technology we have is anonymous. And a couple years ago, we went through the exercise with CNIL here. Gave them our design and so on, and they gave an opinion. And I could look at that process and say, won't say it's completely bogus, but it's what it is, right? It's very limited. You know, the people at CNIL have only so much time and so much time to spend on looking at something. So that, you know, they gave us a positive evaluation, but what is it? It's, you know, one man week of time or something on this. So it is what it is, but you cannot get really a lot of confidence from an analysis like that something is really anonymous. So sorry about that. So you know, we're happy to get the nice opinion, but so the challenge for us was, well, how can we convince, you know, raise the level of confidence in our technology? And one thing we did, so that's kind of the second thing somewhere on that slide, is we had the idea of running a bounty program for our system. So basically, Aircloak put up $15,000, and we came up with a measure of anonymity, and then we would pay people more or less if they could break anonymity to a greater or lesser degree, given more or less external knowledge about the data. And we ran this program about this time last year, and it was very, very good in many respects. We gave Aircloak spent $10,000 on this bounty program, so there were a couple of successful attacks by our measure, and it's valuable in that, you know, then we fix the holes in the system for these attacks, and we'll continue to run this bounty program as we go forward. So this is, so far as I know, we're the only anonymization company that does this, and it's been a very, very valuable exercise for us, and we would certainly like to see more people doing this kind of thing. And the third thing I want to say is that the process of designing this bounty program, as I said before, we had to come up with a score or a measure of anonymity. And we did so for the bounty program, and we've since generalized this a little bit, and we realized at some point that we could use this measure on any anonymization technology. It's a measure that's based on literally attacking the anonymization system and measuring how well you do with respect to these three criteria, singling out inference and linkability. And because it's fairly general, then I decided as a researcher to try to open this up. So we created something called the Open GDA Score project, where GDA Score stands for General Data Anonymity. And the website is shown up here. It was launched literally just a few days ago. But we have software tools for supporting building attacks on anonymity systems and measuring the quality of those attacks, or the strength of the anonymization system. And part and parcel of that is also a way of measuring utility. And my hope is that that this will be kind of a good basis, not just for companies to open up their technology and give people a basis for really understanding if it's strong or not, but also hopefully leading to certification programs where people can use this kind of measurement as part of how they certify anonymization systems.
Right. So this score is based on these three criteria that we discussed before, that Felix also mentioned, and I guess that's the basic idea first of all, right? This is how anonymization is defined, and that's how we measure how anonymous a system is. Now, I think that's the first question mark that Ilya had already in the discussion before. Are these criteria that we have actually still usable, or should they be updated? Maybe you can go into this a little bit.
Yeah, I actually want to get back to the black squares.
Right.
Yeah, because just let's look at the recital 26 of GDPR. Yeah, what it states is that you need to take a look at the means which will be reasonably likely used. Yeah, and also like giving a thought about all technical means, up-to-date technologies, and so on. So imagine the situation where these black squares, first you only see them from each individual camera, so they are not bound, and you don't have the information how to map them between each other. And you also have a very secure environment where, sorry, where you are not allowed to add any additional data sources, where any access is logged, audited, where you can have, like in the UK right now, since a while, you can have a really strong penalty for trying to re-identify. Yeah? In this case, singling out a black square on a screen will not constitute a privacy issue. And that's why this is, there must be a tremendous difference between analyzing anonymity of the individual level data So be it a black square, be it your purchasing history, which was anonymized on the individual level, yeah. So nobody sees your name and surname, but you have still like some products or hashed products or so names. And versus aggregated data anonymization. And I just think that the Working Party 29 criteria is like inference, like linkability, like singling out, they just don't apply when you talk about the individual level anonymization, because it's clear in the data set you have multiple records for the same person, so you can link. You can infer that this person bought a couple of products, or that this square moved from left to right, yeah? You can single out this square on the screen. So what you require is, you require the context of anonymization and usage of this data, and there is an ethical question also, for which purpose will this data be used. I'm really looking forward to the opinion on the other side, yeah.
So if I'm not quite sure what you just said. So
Shall I repeat?
I mean, I thought at first you were saying that, you know, because you might have other restrictions or something placed on the usage of this data, you can regard it as anonymous.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I'll let somebody else respond in that case.
Yeah.
No, you have a...
So
I have another question.
okay, so you as a certification body, right? Yep. You at the moment you look at these criteria and you say, okay, that works or it doesn't work. It's according to these criteria or not. What if someone comes along and says, well, but the likelihood and the means, and you know that it's so expensive to run an attack on this, and it's completely unrealistic that this actually happens. Isn't that good enough?
Thus far, it isn't, and we have, I confess, a kind of an absolutist way of considering things. But because it's really complicated to come with good arguments and having a really risk-based analysis. I mean, I know the GDPR is built somehow this way, and it'd be kind of could be in the future that we will be able to build such tools, and would make sense. But thus far, anonymization is so complicated. Systems are so diverse and tailor-made, and it seems really hard to come with a common measurement that would allow us to say, okay, oh, that's enough, 5% of whatever, I don't know, and yeah, yes, it is anonymous, or no, it's 5.5 now, you won't make it. Why not? I mean, thus far we're not ready to really give a clearance with such indicators, and so that's why we keep these three criteria as a benchmark.
But just for me to understand, because you cannot measure the risk, or because you don't think it would be the right thing to do?
I think because thus far we're not even able to compute a risk,
right,
on this.
Then I have a question. So, and do you think, so you from your data protection authority's perspective, would you nevertheless, so without measuring the risk, would you nevertheless build up such a certification mechanism because you think this could be left out? Or do you think, no, the risk assessment would be really necessary from a legal standpoint to include in the certification mechanism, so we have to wait until we get the right measures?
But then we don't have the legal certainty that you were asking for.
Yeah.
And you as well, by the way, right? Actually, you guys want someone to say this works and this doesn't, and here's the reason.
And well, I think we can do both actually, and so you can have certification without risk assessment and vice versa. So I think they can be decorrelated, even though that might be interesting to have such a tool for a certification body.
And can I just, because I really would like to better understand how this looks like, because Lorraine, you said something similar, right? So, and I just like to know how such a certification scheme would really look like in the meaning of what's the target of evaluation. So is this the technology, or is it really a specific process? Which would mean that in Ilya's case, because everything is customized, you have to certify each time again when the technology is adapted to a certain use case, or in your case, because you claim that you can tackle all different use cases. So
I'd like to answer a few of those points. because I couldn't agree more on what Ilya said before. And to answer what you said, Felician, first of all, indeed, the GDPR is a risk-based approach, and the problem with the criteria of the Article 29 Working Party is that it's a zero-risk approach, and everybody has said it. When we analyze these guidelines, there is no acceptable risk that is deemed to be acceptable by the Article 29 Working Party. And this is a really all-or-nothing approach, and this is why the DPA cannot find a solution, because, and this is the main point, what I want to say, if we want to have a certification, we need to have criteria, but criteria cannot solve everything. We must look at the core bottom of the question, and the question is, should we rely on the technology only? Because I really believe that we are asking from anonymization something that it cannot be. We are waiting for somebody to prove us that we have a technology that is flawless now and for the future in every context, and this will never happen. If I may take the example of encryption, when I try to encrypt a database, I'm sure that somebody, some days, will hack it, will break the encryption. But that is not why the DPA will consider that I have not made my obligation to encrypt it. There is a scholar who said we shouldn't talk about anonymization, but trying to achieve anonymization. And you said that the reasonable means must be assessed, and this is exactly what the Breyer case, an IP address stated. It looked at the reasonable mean, financial, human, in order to see if behind the IP address we can find who it is, and this is what we must assess. So we have to stop trying to limit ourselves to technical criteria. And technique cannot be the only solution. We have to have contractual criteria and legal and contractual warranties, such as who has access and who is bound by a confidentiality obligation, and is there organizational measures, etc. When you are trying to secure an information system, even the most confidential system can be accessed by the administrator, because unless it's encrypted. So technology only is not the solution. We have to have various measures, various steps in order to ensure anonymization. An anonymization technology is not enough to ensure anonymity.
Right. So, okay, let's take a quick question round. So, if there's questions from the audience at this point, we can go to them now. I think this gentleman was first here in the scarf.
So I think the guy's going to move the mic.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. I just want to make 2 points. Just to Felicien, your point about risk measures. There's about 50 years of literature in the statistical disclosure control community on how to measure risk. So there's a lot of work that can be drawn upon to answer that particular question, and a lot of validations of these risk measures. And then on the more general question...
I know you've made a big deal of work. I know your work.
Okay. So there is literature you can draw from for risk measurement. And then to Lorraine's point, at least in the health industry, the risk-based approach that she describes is the predominant way that has been used in practice for the last at least decade and a half to manage the risk and facilitate the sharing of health data for research purposes and for drug development and so on. It's been used as a practical matter. It has worked very well. When it's been applied properly, the risks have been managed in a very reliable and robust way. The challenge is when people don't do that, then we run into all kinds of problems. So we have strong empirical evidence that this risk-based approach works well in practice. I mean, at least in the healthcare industry, where I have the most experience, that's where it's been operating well for the last, like I said, decade and a half or so.
Okay, thank you. Not quite sure who was next.
Yeah,
I think the gentleman in the shirt, but I don't. Sorry, we'll take you next.
Hi, my name is Ciprian Cornea. I work for Philips Research in the Netherlands.
Hi.
One of the challenges that I see in my work is that the researchers would like to piggyback on the wealth of data. I'm speaking here of health-related research.
Yeah.
that is available from publicly available repositories, which are, for sake of simplicity, published in the USA, coming from the USA data subjects, where the data is collected under waiver of consent.
So not anonymized data sets.
I'm sorry?
They are not anonymized, they're personal data
That
sets.
is claimed on the websites.
Okay.
That is in a good way to be used for research. Sometimes they use the word anonymous. But then in Europe, when we would like to use that information, the dilemma becomes, okay, let's see, can we also claim in Europe that we have anonymous data or not? And the USA legislation is much more descriptive than the current GDPR is. And I think such a certification of, well, a code of conduct to anonymous in Europe would help a lot Europeans not to lose competitive advantage in front of the USA or Japan or other big players in the industry.
Yeah.
This is just a comment. No question. I mean.
So, okay. All right, we'll take you in the second round, okay? And now let's take the lady here in front, and then we'll continue with our panel.
Hi, everyone. I'm a data protection attorney, and I wanted first to see your opinion on a terminological difference, which is the difference between non-personal and anonymized data, if there is one. And why I think this is important is because not only do we have a directive on the free flow of non-personal data, I don't exactly know if we can find such non-personal data. I'm struggling with it. But from a certification point of view, I think it would be very useful if we could have a certification mechanism for technology as a whole, whether it's apps or whatever it is, that doesn't use personal data from the very beginning. So it's not anonymized, meaning something that was personal data, but it's stripped, again, if that's possible, from everything that makes it personal data, but something that was not personal in the first place. And let me give you a very concrete example. Google Analytics claims in very visible places, you can find it even on the ICO of UK website, that the Google Analytics cookies don't track you in a personal way. They connect, it says that they collect data in an anonymous form. That's not true, obviously, we know that. But a lot of analytics tools online claim that they are anonymous, which is, to me, a contradiction in terms, because the point in any analytics tool is to differentiate between users. The minute you do that and you distinguish one person from another, even if you don't know the name, the civil identity, let's say, it's that singling out criteria. You have personal data, so how can we have an analytics tool that's anonymous? I doubt that's possible. But if it's possible, I would like to have a certification about it. So analytics is one, and the other one, which is a very, and will become an even bigger issue, is programmatic advertising, real-time bidding, where we have personal data leakage everywhere. If it were possible for it not to include personal data, again from the very beginning, everyone, the entire online advertising industry, would love to have a certification mechanism that this is actually happening. So I would like to see your views on that, whether a certification mechanism is at all visible or possible for something like that.
Thank you. Let's actually lead over, Max, to you. I have a question. So your research is focused on how innovation is, I guess, inhibited or changed by privacy regulation, right?
I posed the question whether this is really the case.
Okay, very good.
I tried to answer it.
So when it comes to a certification, like the lady here mentioned, where on the spectrum of, I would say, industry standard and state of the art does such a certification program has to sit in order to be practical, in order to allow us a certain amount of freedom for innovation, but at the same time also protect individuals?
What such a certification scheme has to cover, or
so in other words, is a certification supposed to sort of break the boundary and and move beyond what is currently being done on the market? Or is it supposed to say, this is actually best practice, it may not be the best that we can do, but it's pretty good, all things considered?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is an argument in the legal debate, what a certificate has actually to deliver or to promise or to assess whatever. And many people say that a certificate has to go beyond the required minimum level of protection of the GDPR. I have a slightly different opinion of that, because I think because of all the procedural instruments, it is very hardly to require a substantive minimum requirement. Yeah? But this is maybe a very theoretical list out. In any case, what a certification mechanism is actually deemed to do is to reduce legal uncertainty by specifying certain requirements of the GDPR with respect to a specific process. And that's there I think okay. One point, and then the question is, and this is what we discussed also with the German data protection authorities and with this German accreditation agency, because of course, even if you have legal certainty, it might be very burdensome to go through such a certification process if everything has to be proved. If you look at these 99 articles of the GDPR, it might be, so one gets a gut feeling how complex such a certification process can be in the very end. And so one of our ideas was whether it's also possible to reduce the scope of what requirements are actually certified. So one idea was that we, for example, if the state-of-the-art requirement of the data protection by design approach is too difficult to grasp, so we simply leave it out. And then signal in the certificate, hey, we certified this, and this, but not whether this is state-of-the-art. But there was a very clear answer from the side of the Data Protection Authority and the accreditation agency that this is not going to happen. Yeah, so
right, so are we sitting at a point where we say, well, very few things can be really certified according to our current regulation, and the others are not supposed to happen, and we'll just stop right there until we have a perfect system?
No, also I think a lot of things can be certified. So I mean, it's stated in the law that it must be a process which can be certified. And I think then the crucial question is, okay, if we shall make this happen, if we can't reduce the amount of provisions we have to check, then at least we should design it in a way that it adapts to the non-linearity of our economic processes. Yeah? This is one of the crucial points. And there, my personal opinion is that this will, of course, be possible, but this is difficult because then the data protection authorities who check the certification criteria in the beginning, they have to trust whether something like a data protection board within the certification body who proves then in a later stage when some new risks show up, whether these new risks are still covered, then the data protection authority is out of the process, and so it has to trust the data protection authority. And this is why, in terms of power, it might be an interesting question whether they accept such a dynamic certificate or not.
So this is exactly the dynamic problem that you talked about in the beginning, and in a way, I think that leads back to what you were saying, right? When it comes to cryptography, for example, or I guess classical IT security, the systems are always broken at some point, and then they will be improved upon, in order to be safe again, and that has to be fine.
But I think we can find some flexibility in really relying on a link with the privacy impact assessment, because this is really a tool that the GDPR learned us to use. And as Ilya said, the context of use, the context of the anonymization is very important. So a certification can manage the criteria, etc. But the context of the anonymization must really be taken into account, especially if you are anonymizing in order to put on an open data program. The risks are clearly not the same as if it's a private research with the appropriate confidentiality measures, etc. So we must have this precise way in the criteria to manage that.
Okay, and then let us ask again. So if we take the two examples, Aircloak and Teralytics. So would you mean, if you say in a certification mechanism, we have also to address the context in a way. So does this mean that you can't certify, it's really an open question. You can't certify Aircloak because Aircloak claims to be to anonymize context independent.
Yeah,
Independently.
I think one point got lost on the way. So I think that you can certify Aircloak for sure, because we are talking about the anonymization of aggregated insights. Yeah, my point about individual level data anonymization, it's really an open point where, I mean, we are struggling with that on a regular basis. So if you have the individual level data which somebody claims to be anonymous, I mean, look at the Netflix case where they merged it with IMDb data. Yeah, so it was released publicly, it got re-identified. Yeah, so it's obvious that individual level data has a very high risk. But my question is, like, under circumstances, as you said, like if you do the risk analysis and everything, can you deem the individual level data, be it telco data, product purchases or black squares, yeah, can you deem that to be anonymous, and can you certify that? That's the question.
Certification can be a first step. We can certify a technology, but it's not enough to ensure full anonymity.
Okay, just a quick word. I think we are redefining somehow what we consider anonymous. And from the regulator point of view, I find it somehow we do this carefully because, well, obviously we must not confound the definitions, and pseudonymization is not equivalent to anonymization, obviously. And this is really something we have to keep in mind. And also, I think Max stressed the point that it is dynamic processes, and meaning that what was considered anonymous 15, 20 years ago is not considered anymore, and it's going to change again. And today we use these criteria, and they might be not perfect, obviously, and they don't permit to do everything you want and stuff like that. But we also will rely on the help of the research community and various work that's been led to improve this and maybe use different tools. And that's why it's really important for us to regulators to keep contact, stay in touch with the researchers, because obviously that's where the innovation will come, and that will really help us build tools that might be better, or at least we hope so.
So Paul, as a researcher, what do you say about this question? Can individual level anonymity exist in the first place, or is it always pseudonymous data? And if yes, how can you measure it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's the right question. I mean, what this gentleman, sorry, I don't know your name, but he talked about, long history of understanding risk, of dealing with risk, of sharing data under very controlled circumstances, and so on. And normally this is fine, and should be allowed to be done. I think just the thing is that GDPR, offered this beautiful cookie that said, look, if you're anonymous, you can go home free. Right. And now everybody wants to be anonymous, and after all, it's not that easy. So if you're not, and the criteria should be strong, and if you can't match it, then just don't call yourself anonymous. This doesn't mean you can't do business or share data or whatever, but you just have to do it under strong understanding of the risks and so on. But you're still under GDPR.
Yeah, but you also have to do it after gathering consent, and then
sure, of course,
very difficult.
That's life.
I mean, and right. But Ilya is sitting at his telco customers, and
Ilya should be using Aircloak.
Fair enough.
But maybe this is also the solution, because Lorraine, if you say that certification is just a first step, and then, I mean, if I imagine I'm a data controller and responsible primarily for applying the GDPR or complying with it, and then I go through a certification process in order to be sure, hey, now I'm compliant, now I have a signal, now I can show this to data protection authorities on the market. But then I come to you and you tell me, well, that was just the first step. Then I would say, okay, then a certification mechanism doesn't make sense for me at all. So I would say, of course, a certification mechanism must signal real compliance with the GDPR. The question is just what does this really cover? So would a data protection authority go so far that it says, well, we measured the de-anonymization risk, it's 5%, I don't know whether this is the right metric at all, but I say, as a data protection authority now approving this certificate, this is okay legally. And this is the step you data protection authorities have to make then.
Right. I would like to use the last 5 minutes for questions again. Please end your questions with a question mark and keep them short, ideally. Could you bring the, do we still have a microphone somewhere? Probably not, maybe.
Well, just shout it and we can repeat.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I'm Ian Fish, BCS Chartered Institute in the UK. I'll try and keep it as short as possible. So isn't the problem here that the definition of anonymity in GDPR is anything like it? It isn't really a definition, but the closest thing is in recital 26, which Ilya mentioned. And
which is 5 years old, right?
Yeah, and that definition basically is a binary definition. Now, you're all agreed that this is a risk issue, and we all know in risk that you can't reduce risk to zero except by stopping doing something. So that's the question, really. Is that where the problem really lies, that the definition in GDPR, and also Lorraine said that and I'm not that familiar with the Working Party 29 opinion, but she said that was zero risk as well. So that's where the problem is.
Right. I think we pretty much all agree on that. That it's not so easy. Of course, with Aircloak, we're trying to get to the point where it's not risk dependent. But I would say probably if you dig into it long enough, you find the point at which we also say, well, there's a certain amount of risk that you have to.
I mean, you'll never get to that point, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't get as close to it as you can.
Right.
Right. So it doesn't mean, well, we throw out the whole idea of
so you wouldn't set a
anonymity
threshold
and just always, go by risk. Right. But at some point, I don't know, just to give a crazy example, say the governments all got together, put 10 billion euros into really understanding if a technology was at risk or not, and nobody could find an attack. People would be pretty comfortable at that point, right? It doesn't
mean the risk is zero.
It's still not zero, right? It could. All of encryption that runs over the internet today is not zero risk. It's as Lorraine was said, somebody may come up with a problem. We don't have mathematical proofs that today's encryption is risk-free. So this is something you can't get around. But you can get somewhat close to it, and as long as you can do that, then at some point a DPO can say, yeah, I think that's good enough. And that's
okay, but then they might still have to have a measure to say that. Do we have more questions here? Yes?
Hello, thanks a lot for the panel. It was very, very good one. 2 questions. First one, do you think that for the process of anonymization, because anonymization is also processing data, right? Are you of the opinion that you need a separate consent for that, or also legitimate interest could be a basis? And the second question is, do you agree that in general definition, the issue is not only certification for anonymization, but also very broad definition of personal data, and then there's also maybe a need for some guidance or narrowing it down a bit as well. Thank you.
So deletion of data is also processing, as far as I'm aware. I don't know, what do the legal guys have to say about this problem?
So so I talked in Germany with some data protection authorities, and they say that the anonymization of data can be based on the legitimate interest clause.
Right, exactly.
I don't know how others see it.
I can comment on the telco data. So the e-privacy directive was implemented in the telecommunication laws in different countries, and this implementation states clearly, after the data is not required for the purpose of service provision, it can be either erased or anonymized. And then you can use the not legitimate interest of GDPR. You can use the compliance with applicable laws and regulations, where provider must be compliant with telecommunication law, in order to anonymize. If you don't have that ground, then you might have to require a consent.
Okay, last question. That's it? Okay, then you can make your final remark if you have one, Max. Do you?
Okay, my final remark is, I think it's complex, but I think it's possible to certify anonymization processes. And maybe the solution is not to promise, hey, I certify this is anonymous now, but I certify the data minimization principle is met. And then it's to be find out to which level we get in the certification process. Is this really anonymous now, or is it at least pseudonymous, etc.? Then it's more flexible.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, guys. This has been fantastic. Thanks to the audience.